Commander Vexthai stood at the tall window of his apartment, watching the 3 moons of Zephyr Prime rise over the crystal spires of the capital city. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, an aging Zephyrian with deep blue skin marked by countless scars. His forearms hung at his sides, 2 of them ending in mechanical prosthetics that gleamed dully in the moonlight. The message pad on his desk had been blinking for 3 days now. He knew what it contained without reading it again. The military academy wanted him to speak to their officer cadets about the human wars. They had been asking for years, and he had been refusing for just as long. Vexthai turned away from the window and walked to his study. The walls were covered with medals, commendations, and battle ribbons from a long and distinguished career. But there was one wall that remained empty, the wall where his human campaign medals should have hung. He had locked them away 50 years ago and never looked at them since. A soft chime announced a visitor at his door. Vexthai sighed and made his way to the entrance, his mechanical legs whirring softly with each step. The door slid open to reveal Dean Mordak from the academy, her elegant silver robes marking her high rank in the educational hierarchy. "Commander Vexthai," she said, bowing slightly in the traditional Zephyrian greeting. "I hope you will forgive my unexpected visit." "Dean Mordak," Vexthai replied, stepping aside to let her enter. "I assume this is about the speaking engagement I have declined 17 times. The Dean's pale eyes flickered with amusement. 18 times, actually. But who is counting? She moved into his living area and admired the view of the city. "You have a beautiful home, Commander. Very peaceful." "Peace is something I have learned to value," Vexthai said carefully. "Of course it is." Dean Mordak turned to face him directly. "But peace must be protected, and protection requires knowledge. Our cadets graduate with perfect scores in galactic military history, stellar navigation, and advanced weapon systems. But they know nothing about humans." "They know enough," Vexthai replied. "Humans are our allies now." "The wars are over, are they?" The Dean pulled out a data tablet and showed him recent news reports. "Human expeditionary forces are pushing into the Andromeda Spiral. 3 new human colonies established beyond the rim last month. Human merchant fleets are carrying weapons to species we have never heard of." She set the tablet down on his coffee table. "The humans are still out there, Commander. Still expanding. Still doing what humans do." Vexthai felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "What humans do," he repeated softly. "My cadets think humans are just another member species of the Galactic Alliance," Dean Mordak continued. "They see human diplomats and traders and scientists, and they think they understand what humanity is. They have no idea what humans become when they are threatened. Perhaps that is for the best," Vexthai said. "Is it?" The Dean stood and walked to his metal wall. "You have the Silver Star of Valor, the Cross of Military Excellence, the Order of the Galactic Shield. You commanded fleets, Commander. You fought in 14 major engagements and never lost a single battle." She paused. "Until you met the humans." Vexthai's mechanical hands clenched into fists. "I did not lose to the humans." "No," the Dean agreed. "You won. You drove them back from the Kepler sector. You broke their siege of Proxima Centauri. You were there when the human leadership surrendered and agreed to join the Alliance." She turned to face him. "But you never talk about those victories. You never celebrate them. You never even display the medals you earned fighting them." "Some victories come at too high a price," Vexthai said quietly. Dean Mordak nodded. "That is exactly what our cadets need to understand. They need to know that winning against humans is possible, but they need to know what it costs." She moved closer to him. "Commander, in 6 months the first class of cadets born after the human wars will graduate. They will receive their commissions and be sent out into the galaxy. Some of them will encounter humans in situations where diplomacy fails. When that happens, they need to know what they are facing." Vexthai walked to his desk and picked up the blinking message pad. The formal invitation was still there, waiting for his response. "The Academy has other veterans. Commander Thaklon served in the Titan campaign. General Veltar was at the Battle of Europa. Commander Thaklon refuses to speak about humans at all," the Dean replied. "He claims his memories are too damaged by trauma conditioning. General Veltar tried to give a lecture last year and had a breakdown in front of the cadets. They had to sedate him and take him to the medical center." Vexthai set the message pad down. "And you think I am more stable than they are?" "I think you are stronger than they are," Dean Mordak said simply. I have read your psychological evaluations, Commander. You never requested trauma conditioning after the wars. You never asked for memory modification or emotional dampening treatments. You chose to remember everything. Sometimes I wonder if that was wise, Vexthai admitted. Perhaps it was not wise, the Dean said, but it was necessary. You are one of the few beings in the galaxy who truly understands what humans are capable of. And you are still sane enough to talk about it. Vexthai looked out the window again. The moons had risen higher now, casting long shadows across the city. Somewhere out there, young Zephyrians were sleeping peacefully, dreaming of glorious military careers and heroic battles among the stars. They had no idea what real war looked like. What would you want me to tell them? He asked. The truth, Dean Mordak replied. Whatever you think they need to know to survive if they ever have to fight humans again. And if the truth breaks them. The Dean was quiet for a long moment. Then at least they will be broken here in a classroom where we can help them heal. Better that than broken in space where no one can hear them scream. Vexthai turned the message pad over in his mechanical hands. The invitation felt heavier than it should have. I will need time to prepare. The things I would tell them, they are not pleasant stories. I would not expect them to be, the Dean said. I will need guarantees that no recordings will be made, no transcripts, no official records, of course, and I will speak only once. I will not answer questions afterward. I will not discuss details with individual cadets. When I am finished, I leave and we never speak of this again. Dean Mordak bowed deeply. Your terms are acceptable, Commander. Vexthai activated the message pad and composed his reply. His mechanical fingers moved slowly across the interface, each word feeling like a small act of betrayal against his own peace of mind. When he finished, he looked up at the Dean. There is something you should understand, he said. The humans we fought 50 years ago were not soldiers. They were civilians, merchants, farmers, engineers. They had no military tradition, no warrior culture, no experience with interstellar warfare. He paused. The humans you might face today have had 50 years to prepare. 50 years to study us, to learn from what happened, to become something more dangerous than what we encountered. Dean Mordak nodded slowly. All the more reason our cadets need to hear your story. Vexthai sent the message and set the pad aside. Very well. In 1 week I will speak to your cadets. But Dean Mordak? Yes, Commander? Some knowledge comes with a price. Once they hear what I have to say, they will never see humans the same way again. They will never see war the same way again. They may never see themselves the same way again. The Dean met his gaze steadily. Then they will finally be ready to be officers. After she left, Vexthai stood alone in his apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of memories he had spent 50 years trying to forget. In 1 week, he would open doors in his mind that he had sealed shut for good reason. He only hoped that when he was finished, there would still be enough of himself left to close them again. The lecture hall at the Zephyrian Military Academy was filled with eager young faces. 150 cadets sat in perfect rows, their uniforms crisp and their eyes bright with anticipation. They had heard rumors about today's guest speaker, the famous Commander Vexthai, hero of the Outer Rim campaigns and veteran of the legendary human wars. Vexthai stood at the podium, his mechanical limbs gleaming under the bright lights. He looked out at the young officers and saw himself as he had been 50 years ago, confident, ambitious, certain that superior technology and training would overcome any challenge the galaxy could present. Cadets, he began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Today I'm going to tell you about humans. But first I want you to understand something. Everything you think you know about warfare is based on fighting rational opponents. Species that follow logical tactical doctrine. Enemies who retreat when they are outgunned, surrender when they are defeated, and value their own lives above their objectives. A cadet in the front row raised her hand. Sir, are you saying humans are not rational? I am saying that human rationality operates on principles that will challenge everything you believe about military science, Vexthai replied. When we first encountered humanity, our xenobiologists classified them as a moderately aggressive omnivorous species with limited tactical potential. They seemed to confirm this assessment in our early engagements. He activated the holographic display behind him, showing star charts of the Sol system and the surrounding sectors. 53 years ago, human expansion brought them into contact with Zephyrian mining operations in the Kepler sector. There was a dispute over territorial boundaries. Standard diplomatic protocols failed, and the situation escalated to armed conflict. The display showed fleet positions and battle formations. I was a young captain then, commanding the light cruiser Star's Edge. My orders were simple: demonstrate Zephyrian military superiority and force human withdrawal from contested space. A cadet raised his hand. Sir, what was your initial assessment of human military capabilities? Vexthai's expression grew thoughtful. The humans used standard tactical formations that we had seen from dozens of other species. Their ships were smaller than ours, their weapons less sophisticated, their armor lighter. When we engaged them directly, they fell back according to predictable retreat patterns. They seemed to follow conventional military doctrine to the letter. He advanced the holographic display to show the early battle reports. In the first 3 engagements, human forces withdrew when they took 20% casualties. This was exactly what our tactical computers predicted based on their psychological profiles. The humans appeared to be a typical developing species, brave enough to defend their territory but smart enough to avoid futile sacrifices. Another cadet spoke up. Sir, that sounds like rational military behavior. What changed? What changed, Vexthai said slowly, was that we started winning too easily. He paused the display. After 6 months of skirmishes, the human colonial government requested a ceasefire. Their negotiators came to our command ship to discuss terms. I was present at those meetings as a tactical advisor. The holographic display now showed the interior of a Zephyrian command vessel, with figures representing the negotiation participants. The human delegation was led by a woman named Sarah Chen. She was a civilian administrator, not a military officer. She seemed nervous, out of her depth. She kept asking detailed questions about our weapons systems, our ship designs, our tactical procedures. Vexthai looked out at the cadets. At the time, we thought she was trying to understand our capabilities, so she could convince her people to surrender. We were happy to demonstrate our superiority. We showed her our plasma cannons, our shield generators, our targeting systems. We explained our standard battle formations and engagement protocols. A cadet near the back raised her hand. Sir, was that not a violation of operational security? Under normal circumstances, yes, Vexthai replied. But we were dealing with what we believed was a defeated enemy seeking terms of surrender. The intelligence protocols were different. He advanced the display again. The negotiations lasted for 2 weeks. During that time, human military activity in the sector dropped to almost nothing. Their patrols stopped, their defensive positions were abandoned, their fleet pulled back to the edge of the system. The display showed the tactical situation as it appeared to Zephyrian command. Our intelligence officers interpreted this as proof that the humans were preparing for unconditional surrender. Admiral Colthax, our sector commander, even began planning the ceremony for accepting their formal capitulation. Vexthai's voice took on a darker tone. What we did not know was that every question Sarah Chen asked, every system she examined, every tactical procedure we demonstrated was being recorded and transmitted to human military analysts throughout their territory. While we thought we were intimidating a defeated enemy, we were actually giving them a complete education in Zephyrian warfare. The cadets stirred uneasily in their seats. One of them asked, Sir, how did you discover this? We discovered it 3 days after the negotiations ended, Vexthai replied. Sarah Chen returned to the human colony ships and transmitted a simple message to our fleet. The message said, Thank you for the lessons. Class is now in session. The holographic display switched to show new tactical formations, human ships arranged in patterns that looked nothing like their previous deployments. Within hours, human forces began attacking our positions throughout the sector. But they were not using the same tactics we had observed before. Everything had changed. Vexthai manipulated the display to show the new human attack patterns. They had reorganized their entire fleet structure based on what they learned about our weapons and targeting systems. Their ships moved in formations designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in our defensive protocols. They used weapons configurations that maximized damage against our shield frequencies. A cadet asked, Sir, were they successful? Devastatingly so, Vexthai replied. In the space of 48 hours, they destroyed or captured every Zephyrian installation in the Kepler sector. My own ship was disabled by a human attack pattern that should not have existed in their tactical database. The display showed the aftermath of the battles. Zephyrian ships drifting powerless through space, human vessels moving efficiently between targets, But the most disturbing thing was not their sudden tactical superiority. It was the realization of what their behavior during the negotiations actually meant. Vexthai looked out at the increasingly uncomfortable cadets. Sarah Chen had not come to surrender. She had come to study us. Every nervous gesture, every seemingly naive question, every moment of apparent intimidation had been carefully calculated to extract maximum information while appearing harmless. One cadet raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, are you saying the humans deliberately sacrificed 6 months of military operations just to learn our tactics?" "I am saying they sacrificed 6 months, several colonial outposts, and thousands of their own people to gain a strategic advantage," Vexthai replied. "They allowed us to defeat them repeatedly, knowing that each defeat was teaching them how to defeat us in return." The lecture hall had grown very quiet. Vexthai could see the young officers struggling to process this information. It violated everything they had been taught about military logic and acceptable losses. After the Kepler sector fell, Vexthai continued, Admiral Colthax demanded a full review of human psychological profiles. The xenobiologist returned with a disturbing discovery. Humans had not shown us their true tactical capabilities during the early engagements. They had deliberately used inferior strategies to lull us into overconfidence. The display showed comparative analyses of human behavior before and after the negotiations. Everything we thought we knew about human military doctrine was based on performances designed to deceive us. Their retreat patterns, their casualty thresholds, their command structures, all of it had been carefully crafted to present the image of a conventional, predictable enemy. A cadet near the front asked, "Sir, what happened to Admiral Colthax?" "He requested immediate reinforcements and prepared for a full-scale counterattack," Vexthai replied. He was confident that superior numbers and firepower would overcome whatever tactical advantages the humans had gained. Vexthai paused the display and looked directly at the cadets. Admiral Colthax was an experienced officer with an outstanding record against conventional enemies. He had studied every major military engagement in galactic history. He understood logistics, strategy, and fleet tactics better than almost anyone in the Zephyrian Navy. The silence in the hall was complete now. 3 weeks later, Admiral Colthax was dead, and the entire 7th Fleet was destroyed or captured. Vexthai's voice was barely above a whisper, because Admiral Colthax, like the rest of us, had made a fundamental error. We had assumed that humans would fight like everyone else. We thought the rules of warfare were universal constants that applied to all intelligent species. He deactivated the holographic display and looked out at the pale faces of the cadets. That was before we learned that humans do not follow our rules. They make their own rules, and they change those rules whenever it suits them. What we discovered at Kepler was just the Beggy Commander Vexthai stood silently at the podium for several minutes, watching the cadets process what they had learned. He could see the confusion and concern in their young faces. Everything he had told them about the Kepler sector contradicted their basic training about military logic and enemy behavior. "I can see that some of you are struggling with what I have told you," he said finally. "You are thinking that the humans got lucky, or that Admiral Colthax made tactical errors, or that the 7th Fleet was unprepared for asymmetric warfare." He activated the holographic display again. "I thought the same things. We all did." The display showed a new star system, the Kepler Station Complex, a massive asteroid mining facility surrounded by defensive platforms and patrol ships. After the disaster in the Kepler sector, High Command assigned me to lead the investigation into human tactical capabilities. My orders were to study their methods, identify their weaknesses, and develop countermeasures. A cadet raised her hand. "Sir, what did you find?" "I found that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong," Vexthai replied. The humans had not gotten lucky at Kepler. They had done exactly what they intended to do from the beginning. He manipulated the display to show intelligence reports and tactical analyses. While we were celebrating our easy victories, they were dissecting our every move, learning our patterns, and preparing for a completely different kind of conflict. The display switched to show the approach to Kepler Station. 6 months after the 7th Fleet was destroyed, I was given command of a task force with orders to retake the Kepler mining complex. Intelligence indicated that the humans had turned it into their primary base of operations in the sector. Vexthai advanced the display to show his fleet's battle formation. I had 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 2 assault carriers with full marine complements. The humans appeared to have only a handful of converted civilian ships and minimal defensive installations. By every tactical calculation, we should have overwhelmed them easily. A cadet asked. Sir, what was your battle plan? Standard assault doctrine, Vexthai replied. Eliminate the orbital defenses, establish fire superiority, and deploy Marines to secure the station. The operation was expected to take 18 hours at most. He paused. It took 18 days. The holographic display changed to show the reality of what the task force encountered. When we arrived at Kepler Station, we found that the humans had completely transformed the mining complex. What had been a simple industrial facility was now something that defied classification. The display showed a maze-like structure of interconnected tunnels, improvised fortifications, and converted mining equipment. The humans had used the station's own construction systems to turn every corridor into a potential ambush point. They had converted ore processors into weapon foundries. They had turned mining lasers into defensive cannons. The entire complex had become a single massive trap. Vexithai's mechanical hands gestured at the display, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they had done all of this while keeping the mining operation running. They were still extracting ore, still processing minerals, still conducting their normal business activities. The station was simultaneously a military fortress and a functioning civilian facility. A cadet near the back asked, Sir, how did they manage that? They used their civilian population as part of the defensive network, Vexthai replied. Miners became soldiers. Engineers became tacticians. Children became intelligence operatives. The entire human colony was integrated into their military structure in ways that we had never seen before. The display showed intercepted communications and tactical reports from the battle. When we began our assault, we immediately encountered problems. Our standard boarding procedures assumed that we would face military personnel in designated combat areas. Instead, we found armed resistance in storage bays, cafeterias, residential quarters, and industrial sectors. Vexthai's voice took on a strained quality. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like the station itself was alive and trying to kill us. Every system we tried to shut down had backup systems. Every corridor we secured became unsafe as soon as we moved on. Every piece of equipment could be turned into a weapon. A cadet raised his hand. Sir, what kind of weapons did they use? Everything, Vexthai replied simply. Industrial cutting tools, mining explosives, construction vehicles, food preparation equipment. They turned maintenance robots into mobile gun platforms. They used atmospheric recycling systems to distribute chemical agents. They even weaponized the gravity generators. The display showed security footage from the boarding actions. Zephyrian Marines moving cautiously through corridors that seemed normal until walls suddenly moved. Floors dropped away or ceilings collapsed. The humans had turned the entire station into a weapon, pointed at anyone who tried to take it from them. Vexthai advanced the display to show casualty reports. By the end of the first day, I had lost 30% of my Marine force and had not secured a single critical system. The humans were not just resisting our advance. They were making us pay for every meter of corridor, every room, every junction. A cadet asked, Sir, did you request reinforcements? I did, Vexthai replied. But High Command was dealing with similar problems throughout human space. Every engagement with human forces was turning into a prolonged siege. Standard tactics were not working anywhere. The display showed tactical communications between various Zephyrian commanders, all reporting the same kinds of problems. What we were learning was that humans did not think about warfare the way we did. When we planned military operations, we considered objectives, resources, and acceptable losses. Humans seemed to consider survival, adaptation, and improvisation. Vexithai manipulated the display to show the ongoing battle for the station. On the third day of the assault, the humans did something that fundamentally changed my understanding of their psychology. They began using their own wounded as bait. The cadets stirred uncomfortably. One of them asked, Sir, what do you mean? They would place injured humans in areas where my Marines could see them, Vexthai explained. Natural compassion and military protocol required us to provide medical assistance. But when we moved to help the wounded, we walked into carefully prepared ambushes. The display showed tactical diagrams of these incidents. The wounded humans were not unwilling participants. They volunteered for this duty. They would lie in pain calling for help, knowing that when we responded they would probably die in the crossfire of their own comrades' attack. Vexthai's voice grew quieter. On the 5th day, I ordered my forces to stop responding to wounded humans. This violated every military regulation and ethical principle we followed, but I could not continue to lose Marines to these traps. A cadet asked, "Sir, how did the humans react to that order?" "They adapted," Vexthai replied. "They began using what appeared to be dead humans as bait instead. Except the humans were not actually dead. They would lie motionless for hours, controlling their breathing and heartbeat, waiting for us to approach. Then they would detonate concealed explosives." The silence in the lecture hall was profound now. Vexthai could see that the cadets were struggling to comprehend this level of dedication to tactical objectives. "By the 10th day," he continued, "I realized that we were not fighting for control of a space station. We were fighting for the right to exist in the same space as humans who had decided we could not be allowed to have it." The display showed the final phase of the battle. The humans began using tactics that made no sense from a traditional military perspective. They would sacrifice entire sections of the station to achieve minor tactical advantages. They would destroy their own equipment rather than let us capture it. They would fight for positions that had no strategic value, just to make us waste resources taking them. Vexthai paused the display and looked directly at the cadets. On the 15th day, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. A group of human engineers sealed themselves into the station's power core, with enough explosives to destroy the entire complex. They sent us a message saying they would detonate if we did not withdraw. A cadet asked, "Sir, were they bluffing?" "That was what I had to decide," Vexthai replied. "Everything I knew about military psychology suggested that they were trying to negotiate from a position of weakness. Rational beings do not destroy valuable assets to deny them to an enemy. The station was worth more intact than destroyed." He reactivated the display to show the final confrontation. "I called their bluff. I ordered my forces to continue the assault." Vexthai's mechanical hands clenched. The humans detonated the power core. The display showed the explosion that tore through the station's central hub, killing everyone in the immediate area and making most of the complex uninhabitable. 47 humans died in that explosion, including the engineers who set it off. They destroyed their own base rather than let us take it. The cadets sat in stunned silence. Finally, one of them asked, "Sir, what did you do then?" "I withdrew my task force and reported to High Command that Kepler Station was a total loss," Vexthai replied. The cadets looked confused. One of them asked, "Sir, I do not understand." "You said the station was uninhabited." Commander Vexthai stood at the podium, looking out at the handful of cadets who remained. The lecture hall that had been filled with eager young faces now held fewer than 40 students. The rest had quietly left during the previous sessions, unable to continue listening to accounts of warfare that challenged everything they thought they knew about military service. "I can see that most of your classmates have decided they have heard enough," Vexthai observed. "That is understandable. What I have told you about human warfare is disturbing, but what I'm about to tell you about the end of the war is worse." He activated the holographic display one final time, showing a view of Earth from orbit. A blue and green world that looked deceptively peaceful. After Proxima Centauri, High Command realized that military victory over humanity was either impossible or so costly that it would destroy the Zephyrian Empire in the process. They decided to try a different approach. The display showed diplomatic communications and strategic planning documents. The new strategy was based on the assumption that human resistance was driven by fear of conquest and destruction. If we could convince them that we intended alliance rather than subjugation, perhaps they would agree to join the galactic community peacefully. A cadet asked, "Sir, how did the humans respond to this offer?" "They accepted it immediately," Vexthai replied. "Within weeks, human negotiators were working with our diplomats to establish terms for what would become the Human Galactic Alliance Treaty." It seemed too easy. The display showed the signing ceremony, representatives from dozens of species gathering to welcome humanity into galactic civilization. I was assigned to the Joint Military Commission that would oversee the integration of human forces into the alliance structure. It was considered a prestigious assignment, a chance to study human military capabilities up close. Vexthai's expression grew troubled. That was when I began to understand the true cost of fighting humans. It was not measured in ships destroyed or lives lost. It was measured in what fighting them did to us. A cadet near the front asked, "Sir, what do you mean?" "I mean that exposure to human warfare changes how you think about conflict," Vexthai replied. "Before we fought humans, war was a rational activity with clear objectives and acceptable parameters. After fighting humans, war became something darker. The display showed psychological evaluation reports from Zephyrian military personnel who had fought in the human wars. 60% of our veterans required therapy for what our doctors called adaptive stress syndrome. They had been forced to develop new ways of thinking about combat, and those new ways of thinking were disturbing." Vexthai manipulated the display to show specific case studies. Commander Thaklon, who I mentioned earlier, began using human-style tactics against other enemies. He would sacrifice his own ships to achieve tactical advantages, ignore his own casualties to press attacks, and treat the objective as more important than the lives of his crew. A cadet asked, "Sir, was he successful?" "Devastatingly successful," Vexthai replied. "His methods were so effective against conventional enemies that other commanders began adopting them." Within 5 years, the entire Zephyrian military had been transformed by exposure to human warfare. The display showed tactical doctrine manuals and training programs. We began teaching our officers to think like humans, to consider options that had previously been unthinkable, to push beyond rational limits when necessary, to treat war as a contest of will rather than a calculation of resources. Vexthai's voice grew quiet. But the most disturbing change was not in our military doctrine. It was in our relationship with our own mortality. A cadet raised her hand. "Sir, can you explain that?" "Before fighting humans, Zephyrian military philosophy emphasized the preservation of life and the efficient use of resources," Vexthai explained. "We fought to achieve objectives with minimal casualties. We surrendered when victory became impossible. We treated our own lives as valuable assets that should not be wasted." He paused, his mechanical hands clenching. "After fighting humans, we began to understand that sometimes the objective is more important than survival. That sometimes continuing to fight after defeat is more valuable than living to fight another day. That sometimes sacrifice is not waste, but strategy." The display showed casualty reports from post-war engagements. Zephyrian forces fighting with unprecedented determination and accepting losses that would have been unthinkable before the human wars. Our military became more effective but also more ruthless, more willing to pay terrible prices for victory, more like the humans we had fought. A cadet asked, "Sir, is that necessarily a bad thing?" Vexthai looked at the young officer for a long moment. "That depends on what you think the purpose of military service is," he replied. "If you believe that soldiers exist to achieve objectives regardless of cost, then perhaps it is good. If you believe that soldiers exist to protect civilized values while minimizing harm, then perhaps it is not." The display changed to show the final phase of the war, the evacuation of Earth as humanity prepared to join the galactic community. The human integration process required massive logistical support. Millions of humans had to be relocated to new worlds, integrated into existing colonies, and provided with the technology necessary to participate in galactic civilization. Vexthai advanced the display to show his own role in this process. "I was assigned to oversee the evacuation of the Luna colonies, civilian mining operations on Earth's moon. It was supposed to be a routine administrative task." A cadet asked, "Sir, what happened?" "The human civilian administrators requested permission to destroy the mining infrastructure before leaving," Vexthai replied. "They said it was too dangerous to leave operational in case other species tried to use it without proper safety protocols." The display showed the Luna mining complex, vast underground facilities that had been carved out of the moon's surface over generations. I denied the request. The infrastructure was valuable, and there was no logical reason to destroy it. The human administrators accepted my decision without argument. Vexthai's voice took on a strained quality. 3 days before the final evacuation transport was scheduled to depart, there was an accident in the main processing center, an explosion that collapsed several tunnels and trapped 47 human workers in the deep mining levels. The display showed the disaster site, twisted metal and collapsed rock blocking access to the trapped miners. The human evacuation coordinator, a man named James Martinez, requested permission to delay the final transport while rescue operations continued. I denied the request. The transport schedule was critical to the overall integration timeline. A cadet asked, "Sir, what did the humans do?" "They accepted my decision," Vexthai replied. "James Martinez organized the evacuation of all non-essential personnel and prepared to abandon the trapped miners. But 12 hours before the transport departure, he came to my office with an unusual request." Vexthai paused the display. He asked if I would help him dig. The silence in the lecture hall was profound. Vexthai's mechanical hands trembled slightly as he continued. I told him that manual rescue operations were pointless. The trapped miners were probably already dead, and even if they were alive, we could not reach them in time. It was a waste of resources and effort. The display showed the Luna colony's final hours, humans loading onto transport ships while rescue equipment sat unused near the collapsed mine. James Martinez nodded and thanked me for my time. Then he went back to the mine entrance and began digging by hand. A cadet asked, "Sir, did others join him?" "Eventually, yes," Vexthai replied. Other humans saw him digging and came to help. Soon there were dozens of them, using whatever tools they could find, working in shifts, refusing to give up despite the hopeless situation. The display showed security footage of the rescue attempt, humans working frantically with improvised equipment, ignoring the approaching departure deadline, focused entirely on reaching their trapped comrades. I watched this from my office and realized that I was seeing the same behavior that had made human military resistance so effective. They were refusing to accept the logical parameters of the situation. Vexthai's voice grew softer. With 2 hours remaining before the final transport departure, I made a decision that violated my orders and contradicted every principle of efficient resource management I had been taught. A cadet asked, "Sir, what did you do?" "I joined them," Vexthai replied simply. I went to the mine entrance and began helping them dig. The display showed Vexthai himself, in his younger body with organic limbs, working alongside the human rescuers. For the next 18 hours, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I used my 4 arms to move rubble, my superior strength to lift debris, my military training to organize the rescue operation more efficiently. The cadets leaned forward in their seats. One of them asked, "Sir, did you reach the trapped miners?" "We did," Vexthai replied. 31 of them were still alive when we broke through. We saved lives that every rational calculation said were already lost. The display showed the successful rescue, exhausted humans and Zephyrians carrying injured miners to safety as transport ships waited on. The lecture hall had grown cold during the break between sessions. Commander Vexthai noticed that fewer cadets had returned. Perhaps 30 had quietly excused themselves after hearing about Kepler Station. Those who remained sat with the rigid posture of soldiers trying to maintain composure in the face of disturbing intelligence. "I see that some of your classmates have decided they have heard enough," Vexthai observed. "That is probably wise. What I'm about to tell you about Proxima Centauri is considerably worse than what happened at Kepler Station." He activated the holographic display, showing a massive space station orbiting a red dwarf star. Proxima Centauri Station was the crown jewel of human expansion in the Alpha Centauri system. It housed nearly 2 million civilians and served as the administrative center for dozens of human colonies. The display zoomed in to show the station's impressive structure, multiple rotating habitats, industrial complexes, and defensive installations. When the war began, Proxima Centauri became a strategic priority for both sides. The humans used it as a staging ground for their operations, and we identified it as a target that would break their will to continue fighting. Vexthai manipulated the display to show the Zephyrian fleet approaching the system. High Command assembled the largest task force in our military history for this operation. 300 warships under the command of Admiral Velkar, the most experienced combat officer in the fleet. His orders were simple: capture or destroy Proxima Centauri Station and end human resistance in the sector. A cadet raised his hand. "Sir, what was the human defensive strength?" "Intelligence estimated 47 military vessels and standard orbital defenses," Vexthai replied. "Against 300 of our most advanced warships commanded by our best officers, with overwhelming firepower advantage." He paused. It should have been over in hours. The display showed the initial stages of the battle, Zephyrian ships moving into attack formation, while human vessels fell back toward the station. The opening engagement went exactly as planned. Human ships retreated when engaged, falling back in what appeared to be a desperate defensive action around the station. Vexthai advanced the display to show the siege developing. Within the first day, we had established complete control of the outer system. Human ships were trapped near the station, outgunned and outnumbered. Admiral Velkar demanded their surrender. A cadet asked, "Sir, did they respond?" "They did," Vexthai replied. The human commander, a woman named Admiral Sarah Chen, the same person who had negotiated at Kepler Sector, sent a simple message. She said, "We respectfully decline. See you in hell." The display showed what happened next. Human ships beginning a seemingly suicidal attack against the overwhelming Zephyrian fleet. What followed was the most brutal naval engagement in galactic history. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied rational explanation. Vexithai's voice grew strained as he described the battle. Human ships continued attacking even after taking crippling damage. Vessels with no main engines used maneuvering thrusters to ram our ships. Cruisers with destroyed weapon systems used their hulks as guided missiles. Fighters with dead pilots were remotely controlled by their wingmates until they crashed into our formations. The display showed tactical analyses of these attacks, but the most disturbing thing was that the human ships never tried to escape. When their vessels were damaged beyond repair, they set course for our largest ships and detonated their reactors. They turned their own defeats into weapons against us. A cadet near the front asked, "Sir, what were the casualties?" By the end of the first week, Admiral Velkar had lost 46 ships and 8,000 crew members. Vexthai replied. The humans had lost their entire fleet. Every single human military vessel had been destroyed or disabled. He paused. That was when the real siege began. The display changed to show the station itself, now surrounded by debris from the destroyed fleets. With no ships left to defend it, Proxima Centauri Station should have surrendered immediately. Instead, the humans began using the wreckage of their own fleet as weapons. Vexithai manipulated the display to show improvised railguns built from station infrastructure. They stripped the magnetic launch systems from their destroyed ships and built them into the station's structure. They used these to fire pieces of wreckage at our approaching vessels. A cadet asked, "Sir, how effective were these improvised weapons?" "Devastatingly effective," Vexthai replied. The humans were firing chunks of their own destroyed ships at velocities that could penetrate our armor. They had turned the debris field into a minefield that they controlled. The display showed Zephyrian ships trying to navigate through clouds of weaponized debris. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that they kept fighting even after we cut off their life support. The lecture hall became very quiet. Vexthai's mechanical hands trembled slightly as he continued. On the 10th day of the siege, Admiral Velkar ordered the destruction of the station's atmospheric processors. This was intended to force surrender by making the station uninhabitable. The display showed the external systems being destroyed by Zephyrian weapons fire. The humans did not surrender. They sealed themselves into emergency shelters and continued operating their weapons systems. When those shelters ran out of air, they put on vacuum suits and kept fighting. Vexthai's voice dropped to almost a whisper. When the vacuum suits failed, they fought while holding their breath. A cadet asked, "Sir, how is that possible?" "Human physiology allows them to survive in vacuum for several minutes if they do not panic," Vexthai explained. The humans used this time to manually load and fire their improvised weapons. They would open airlocks, step into space, fire a salvo at our ships, and then get back inside before losing consciousness. The display showed security footage from the station. Humans in damaged spacesuits moving through airless corridors, operating weapon systems by hand, working in shifts to maintain their attacks even as their environment became completely hostile to life. By the 15th day, the station was effectively dead, Vexthai continued. No atmosphere, no heating, no automated systems. But the humans were still fighting. They had organized themselves into teams that took turns going outside to operate weapons, while the others conserved oxygen in sealed compartments. A cadet raised her hand. "Sir, why did Admiral Velkar not simply destroy the station?" "He tried," Vexthai replied. But the humans had prepared for that possibility. They had distributed their civilian population throughout the station's structure in such a way that destroying it would require killing 2 million non-combatants. Admiral Velkar's orders prohibited unnecessary civilian casualties. The display showed the impossible situation: a military target that could not be destroyed without massive civilian losses, defended by people who refused to surrender even when their situation was hopeless. The humans used our own moral constraints against us. They knew we would not commit genocide to achieve a military objective. HFY advanced the display to show the continuing siege. By the 20th day, we estimated that the humans had perhaps hours of life support remaining. Their attacks were becoming sporadic as more defenders succumbed to oxygen deprivation and radiation exposure. He paused for a long moment. That was when they sent us another message. A cadet asked, "And sir, what did they say?" Admiral Chen, who by this point was almost certainly dead, had pre-recorded a message to be transmitted when the station's life support reached critical levels. HFY replied. The message said, "You wanted to know what humans are capable of. Now you know. We can die for as long as it takes." The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. HFY could see that several cadets were visibly disturbed by what they were hearing. On the 22nd day, Admiral Velkar received new orders from High Command. He continued. The siege was being terminated. Our forces were to withdraw immediately and leave Proxima Centauri Station to whatever fate awaited it. A cadet asked, "Sir, why did High Command order withdrawal?" "Because the siege had become a public relations disaster," HFY replied. News of the human resistance had spread throughout the galaxy. Other species were beginning to question whether the Zephyrian Empire was fighting a legitimate war or committing a slow-motion atrocity. The display showed news reports and diplomatic communications from across galactic civilization. The image of humans dying by inches rather than surrender was generating sympathy for their cause and opposition to our military objectives. High Command realized that winning at Proxima Centauri would cost us more politically than losing. HFY deactivated the display and faced the cadets directly. Admiral Velkar's task force withdrew from the system without achieving its objectives. The most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history had been defeated by a handful of humans with improvised weapons and an unwillingness to accept reality. A cadet near the back asked, "Sir, what happened to the humans on the station?" "That is the most disturbing part of the entire story," HFY replied. 3 days after our withdrawal, rescue ships arrived from other human colonies. They found that nearly 400,000 humans had survived the siege in sealed emergency compartments scattered throughout the station.